Welcome to Merchman Seeds Cup of Joe. On this episode, the South was hit with lots of rain this past week. How does that affect your crops and what can be done? A couple farmers have called asking Ben questions regarding soybean growth stages and fungicide. Hear his opinion and what Illinois Soybean Advisor says. We talk about different technological advances when it comes to spraying fungicide. Hear how excited Joe is about wheat this year.
Hi, this is Joe Mershman. Welcome to Mershman Seeds Cup of Joe. Today we have Ben, Lynn, and Turk, and what's going on this week?
Well, I think we should probably talk just a little bit about what happened down south. Lynn, why don't you give us a recap of what our friends in our southern selling regions have went through?
So down around the Olmsted area where we have our production plant, in that region, they anywhere reports from 11.5 to 14 inches of rain that fell from southern Illinois, Kentucky. I'm not sure if it got over into Illinois or not, but specifically, in that Mayfield area, it seems like they're a really bad hit spot for that rainfall. So a lot of standing water flooding that occurred in a very short period of time, and some concerns on plant stands post receding of all the flood water.
9 inches of rain?
Between 11.5 and 14, depending on where you went to.
That's a lot of water.
I think Aaron specifically at his house had 11.5, and that all occurred from the early morning hours into mid-morning.
So it rained hard.
It rained hard, and for a long time.
Yep, and some of the questions that we're getting are, what considerations do we make, and will these soybeans that are actively growing that are in that R3, R4, R5 time frame, how bad is this going to ding those beans up? So you did a little bit of research. What did you find?
It has more to do with the time that it's actually underwater or waterlogged, I guess we would call. 48 K-State had some research where 48 hours they weren't too concerned about, less than 48 hours they weren't too concerned about the soybeans. As we get further along from that time frame, it all comes back to the temperature. If we're having a little bit cooler conditions, it could be able to survive a little bit longer than that, but if we were hot post-flooding event, we probably have shortened that window up a little bit.
It kind of depends on if the water's moving or not.
Yeah, so I think that's the big thing that they're probably going to fight is where do water that come over the hillside and eventually found its way to the bottom and out we're probably good in those areas, but the low-lying pockets where water is stagnant, it's probably going to take a while for that to come off, and those are areas that would be of concern for those farmers.
Yep. And I mean, it's not just a little bit of rain. He was talking to me last night about how, there are certain fields that were in the lower bottom areas that had tasseled corn, and the corn was completely gone at that point in time. So I think a lot of those crops are probably on their way out, and you can zero some of those out. But on some of these marginal acres, or like what you're talking, the uplands where, they were underwater, or a portion of the plant was underwater for a certain amount of time. Time is going to tell on what we actually find out with those soybeans, but I think there's a decent chance that, we probably took some off the top, but I don't think you're going to have complete widespread death.
Yep.
In that heavy rain situation.
There's still a small window of opportunity to replant in some of those areas too, so it's a very small window, but I think the latest we've ever had a replant in our company was in the Boot Hill, Missouri, and it was August 14th. And it was against the Mississippi River flooding type situation, but very lush, very productive, the best ground, potting soil ground. And those beans still made close to 40 bushels per acre. Planted August 14th, harvested, Thanksgiving area. So that's a positive thing to say, but how long is it going to take to dry out? That's the question.
And how long, what kind of fall we're going to have to finish?
Yep, early frost, late frost.
Yep, even down south, anytime you get into the August time frame, it's flipping a quarter whether you're going to make 15 or 20 bushel an acre. So they do have a longer growing season. They can help out with some of that, but some of the veterans in the industry down there have stated that it's pretty hard to get over 20 bushel an acre anytime you're in August on just the average ground.
I would agree. But again, this is that particular field was just not wanting for anything, nutrients, water. I mean, it's perfect conditions. Green. So that's the top. Yeah, that's the top side. Yours is the reality side.
Right.
And the way that, according to Steven, talking with him, the way that the weather patterns have gone in their favor, I mean, heat and lack of moisture, short of this event from here on out, isn't really a commodity. That you might be wet now, but as those beans then go into their reproductive stage, if you replant them, you're subjected, just like we are right now, to the rainfall to get that to fill out. Otherwise, you're just growing vegetatively and not actually putting on any product. So it'd be something to be cognizant of as we look to where we're going to be at time-wise on the reproductive side to see if it's going to be worthwhile.
Right. Not good. We hope for the best for those guys down there, and I'm hoping that the water recedes fast enough that it doesn't count as stagnant water like what we were talking about, and hopefully the nighttime temperatures are keeping cool enough that the soybeans aren't under as much stress and you don't get that stagnated water. So a couple of the other phone calls that I have had this week or a couple of the statements that I've heard farmers talk about and ask my opinion on was, so first part of July rolls around and we have soybeans that are, potentially getting close to that R3 time frame. And we caught a bunch of moisture and they put new flowers on top. So as we know, the R3 time frame is 3/16 of an inch of a pod at the top 4 nodes of the plant. We've had pretty good growing conditions, and the plant continues to put more flowers on the top as you get more rain or that plant isn't under stress at this point in time. So what happens to that soybean when it goes from R2 to R3 and then potentially takes like a half a step backwards and technically goes back into R2? What do you do with that from a fungicide standpoint on when do I pull the trigger to spray? So I did a little bit of research here, and in my own opinion follows very closely with what this article from the Illinois Soybean Advisor stated. He goes, at this stage, I feel this causes the most confusion. It is defined by having 3/16 of a long pod at the top 4 nodes. What makes it confusing is that if there's a rain event, soybeans will usually take off growing again and add a few more nodes, technically putting the plant back into R2. R3 is significant because that is the peak timing of fungicide applications. I try to err on the earlier side of R3 and do not let the plant technically going backwards into R4 sway me to delay that application. In my opinion, the slowed respiration, which would come from a strobilurin style of fungicide, at this time helps keep the plant to keep the maximum number of pods on that soybean plant. So I am in complete agreement with that statement. So if you're one of those guys that is still waiting to technically bounce between back and forth of what that stage is, it's time now to get the fungicide and insecticide on the soybeans.
And as a gross overstatement from what we looked at this week, April planted soybeans, regardless of the maturity, have probably hit that threshold. Up to a 4.3 that we've seen meeting that criteria. We've probably seen them take off and do that where they've kind of come back to the R2, but definitely the Group 3s are ready to rock and roll. And by the time this comes out, maybe even just a hair bit beyond that.
Right.
And I think that's talking about what that R3 is another important point too that we discussed yesterday, that usually this time of year was we're looking at the plants, on the bottom nodes, you can kind of pull either the flower or the pods off, that you knock a few off. The stuff we were looking at, they're viable. And we're having 5 to 6 flowers per node that is showing up that are staying in the game, and we're adding a couple extra nodes from the planting early. We need to protect this. We have the ability to financially afford this. We need to protect it, so guys need to be very proactive on their application here.
Yep. With the dry growing season that we had, catching a little bit of rain, I'm seeing the most pods per node that I think I've ever seen at this point. So if we can maintain that, like what you're talking about, we have the opportunity to make some unbelievable yields. So the next thing, that question that I've had a couple times over the past 10 days here is, what do I do? We have a handful of drone applicators in the area. That's starting to become a more popular thing. We have both helicopters, we have airplanes, and we have ground rigs, growers that have their own ground rigs or the retailers that have their own ground rigs. What am I losing by putting another track through the field, and what am I potentially gaining by having somebody do it from the air, from not running over the soybeans?
So in 15-inch rows, you're going to run beans down. 30-inch rows, hit and miss, right?
Yep.
So ground rig, air? So that's the question.
That is the
what
question.
makes the most sense?
Correct. So some Iowa State data here from Mark Hanna, and this article was by Clark McGrath, was talking about the different boom widths. So this is for 7.5-inch soybeans and 15-inch soybeans, but not necessarily to 30s. A 60-foot boom has a 2.5% yield loss, a 90-foot boom has a 1.9% yield loss, and a 120-foot boom has a 1.3% yield loss when you're talking about running down narrow rows post flower. So R3 in the reproductive time anything from R3 to R5 is when they did the study on this in 7.5 and 15-inch rows. So when you're running those plants down, you're looking at potentially a bushel at the high end. A lot of our sprayers have the 120-foot booms, so you're looking at that 1.3% in the narrower rows. If you own that sprayer, I like the higher gallonage that you can get out of putting it on with a ground rig. Being able to run 15 to 20 gallons definitely gets you the ultimate coverage, but it's kind of the balance back and forth. Do you have square fields? Do you have a lot of contours that you're fighting? They don't show much of a loss at all if you're in 30-inch rows, and most of the time guys can track that. Beans aren't tangled up at this point in time. You're not knocking too many down. So in that instance, growers got to make their own preferences, but my preference is typically with the ground rig and getting the most amount of coverage that you can. Comments?
Any data on 30-inch rows? I mean,
I looked and looked this morning, and they basically slide everything into narrow rows versus wide rows. No damage to wide rows, damage to narrow rows.
Okay.
And I think it boils down to is, can you stay on your rows?
And you could put tram lines out there too if you knew you were going to spray, if you're planting in 15s or 7s or whatever, and leave a track, a 30-inch track. I mean, we don't see that very often, but it can be done, so you can go on so you can have the best of both worlds.
Yep. I know a lot of guys in the corn world that are planting corn in 15-inch rows. They'll have a 22-inch wide, and it's different with corn obviously because more upright, it's easier to row, but they have a 22-inch row where they're crowding the other side and the 15s on everything else, and that allows them to get down in between when they're doing their side dress applications and their fungicide applications over the top. So
again, it depends on your boom width, it depends on your planter, it depends on a lot of different things, but it's going to cost you about a bushel or a little less in 30-inch rows. And so to me it kind of boils down to timing. Do you have time to do it with your ground rig? If not, who can get there first with whether it be a drone, an airplane, or a helicopter? And I think there's a little bit of research showing that the helicopter and the drone actually force it down in the canopy a little bit more than an airplane does. So, but again, I don't know if there's enough difference to say that there is a difference. And so for me, it's who can get there first.
Yep. Oh, I completely agree. It's almost a splitting hairs event at this point, but
yep.
It's one of those. It's splitting hairs. It's like talking about which one of the 3 mode of action fungicides do you pick. It's kind of that same concept to me. It's pick whatever makes the most sense. Pick what makes the most sense from a money standpoint, from an agronomic standpoint. How well is that drone? How well is that helicopter? How well is that airplane going to be able to give you coverage on like point rows and all of those things? I mean, keep all of those things into consideration. And there's advantages and disadvantages in every situation.
Are there trees around the field? Are there high lines around?
Yeah,
I mean, all those things come.
Airplane get in there, and do a good job. Yep, good point.
So, those are a couple of the phone calls I had this week.
Okay. Anything else for you, Lynn?
Guys are getting excited about wheat, and we just finished up harvest, so wheat is on guys' mind for the planting season, and I got the guys geared up over in the warehouse to get started on the wheat run here, and just be in contact with your local Merschman rep when that time comes here to get your wheat needs taken care of. So pretty excited about how that outlook looks.
From a seed quality standpoint, Joe, where are we at on germs for the new wheat?
There's no issue. I mean, we're gonna, we had really good heavy test weights. We even had a little bit of rain on some of our production, but maintained good test weights. We're not anticipating any issues with supply on wheat. We probably had a record yield for our seed acres, average yield. So no issue. And we got some great varieties. If you want to go ultra early, you want to go medium early, we got you covered either way. So I mean, I've never been as excited about wheat as long as I've been here with the varieties that we have, the yield potential. I mean, and when you get 100 bushel yield averages, even above 100 bushel yield averages, we've never seen that locally in a seed production field ever. And then we had, the one customer from Indiana say that he averaged 140 and saw 189 in one spot. I mean, I never dreamt in my life that we'd see that. Wheat now is a competing crop for acres, in my opinion, and if you're set up to manage it correctly, by using fertility correctly and sulfur and then setting up the double crop opportunity, and then of course if you got a bin and you can take it out a couple 3 points wetter, you're just going to gain that much more on your soybean yield. So I mean, I think wheat has, and it lessens your workload in the spring too. I mean, when we get these wet springs, you don't have to care because you got part of your acres planted already. So we're seeing people manage their machinery and their equipment with wheat, and particularly on a marginal acre.
And the price of wheat's kind of skyrocketed here lately due to conditions in Ukraine again with the Black Sea, everybody blowing up one another's ports over there. So price of wheat skyrocketed up, and opportunity is definitely there. Corn, soybeans are kind of following along as well. And then next week we're talking about some high temperatures, and that's going to put some stress on these late pollinating fields for sure on corn.
Yeah, and we got moisture, but we're still behind. So it's going to put stress on the entire plant, corn, soybeans, everything. So again, I think we said it before. When it rains in July, that makes corn yields. Rains in August makes soybean yields. So next week we're still not in August yet. So the soybeans should come through okay, but we're going to need rain.
I agree. The soybeans are going to have the ability to take a pause, and we still need that rain by mid-August at the latest.
I know we hear a lot of people talk about my beans are so short, and I can tell you, as long as I've been ever, got the opportunity to run a way wagon, the tall beans never win a test plot.
Yeah,
they never win a test plot. I've been in beans where the beans were just under my chin. They didn't yield that good. Sometimes the medium one or the shorter one is the one that wins, because stems don't make yield; it's pods that make yield. So.
Takes that much more water, takes that much more drag to get that much more water all the way through the plant. So I wholeheartedly agree.
So I know that's what everybody's looking at now, is how tall their beans are, and it may look great now, but it may not be the right thing for yield.
Yep.
Anything else? If not, I have one of my ghostwriters for jokes gave me a joke. Let me find it here. This one, I'm going to thank Sue Mankey for sending it in to me, and so here it is. An 80-year-old lady was marrying for the 4th time. A newspaper asked if she wouldn't mind talking about her first 3 husbands and what they did for a living. She smiled and said, "Well, my first husband was a banker. Then I married a circus ringmaster. Next was a preacher. And now, in my 80s, a funeral director." When asked why the 4 men had such diverse careers, she explained, "I married 1 for the money, 2 for the show, 3 to get ready, and 4 to go."
That's a good one.
So, thanks, Sue, for the help. And if anybody else wants to help me, please send them in. Anyhow, we hope your family is safe and healthy, and we sincerely appreciate your business. Believe it or not, all the seed companies out there right now are starting to communicate to their dealers what their pricing is going to be. So a lot of things are going on in pricing. So we start this thing all over again in about a couple weeks. They're going to be the influx of seed companies asking you for your business, and all we ask is check us out. Check us out. And I think you'll see that we create a lot of value and we have some great products. So thank you for those that are already planting immersement seeds, and those that are listening or watching. We'd appreciate your business. So take care. See you next week.